confronted with a whole bunch of decisions that we had to make, as you always do when it's a next generation product. We've been around long enough for this to be our third next generation product line, and really only one other vendor that's ever had to do this, and that kind of time frame, that kind of experience, all that we've learned from you and from your experiences, from what's happening around the country, what's happened over time in behavioral health and healthcare in general, there was an awful lot that we've learned that we were able to apply to this next generation product. Back in 1980, 81, 82, Bruce Trimpop, who's right back there, goodness, you'd think he would have just sort of grown into the building and roots would have set. He and I and a couple of other people produced that first generation product, and it was called the HSIS, the Human Service Information System. It was the first product for behavioral health organizations that could do waterfall billing. It was the first product that could handle sliding fee scale, self-pay payments. It was the only product that could provide the necessary information to do reporting to the National Institute of Mental Health, which was still where most of your reporting went to. And over the years, a whole lot of things have had to change, and things continue to have to change and will continue to have to change. We're confronted, because we have customers, with some interesting challenges. If you don't have any customers, it's really easy to develop software. You folks mess up the whole product development process because you can't just say, here, and give you something brand new and wish you luck. There is an interesting challenge associated with moving you from where you are to that next generation product line. So we built out a little bitty decision tree, and that decision tree, goodbye, Robert. We will come back to you at some point, probably. That decision tree, boy, very sophisticated, complex set of equations here. But essentially, we were confronted with a series of questions over the past few years as Clinician's Desktop and Revenue Manager got older, and particularly the client server-based technology and the Delphi technology got older. The first question you're confronted with is, do you just do a front-end retrofit? Do you just paint new screens using web browser stuff and connect it up to the old product, including the old processing routines, the old billing routines, and all the rest of that stuff? Or do you do a foundational change? Do you really get down into the bowels of things and really address all of the issues that exist with the existing product as it's aged, and take advantage of all the new technology that's available in the stuff that's available today? And of course, we decided to make a foundational change, which is why you head downward. And then you have to decide, are you going to take Clinician's Desktop and Revenue Manager and do it all at once, throw it all out and replace it with something completely new? Boy, that's rough. That's very difficult for you folks to absorb, very painful for you folks. It would be easier for us, but it would be much harder for you to simply throw all that stuff out. So you try to create a transitional process that will allow you to move from where you are today to where you were 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, to where you are today and to where we want you to be in the future and where you want to be in the future. And so we chose a transitional approach. And then you have to make a decision about what's reasonable and practical to transition and what's impossible to transition. And what's reasonable to transition is on the clinical side. We were able to take what we now think of as the administrative view in Clinician's Desktop and move to the visual health record, to the VHR, to the timeline, and to all of the, for the technical people, the Java code, the web-based code that stands behind that. We could take the meaningful use functionality that was and is necessary for many of you and create that using the new technology and add that in, supplement the existing stuff. You'd still have that core of Delphi code and the old stuff, but you wouldn't create a disruption, particularly for the clinical staff. The clinical staff are the folks that are the most expensive to make major changes with, to completely recharge, and to moderate and modify all the stuff that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. On a given day, about 20,000 clinical people use our software. 20,000 clinical people. And while no one of you is dealing with 20,000 people. We have to recognize what the impact would be on those 20,000 people, and trying to create a transitional approach, as we have over these last few years, has been an important part of making this change as smooth and as painless as we possibly could make it. On the other hand, the financial side doesn't work that way. When you do medical billing, when you get an 835 that comes back that has claims that have been paid, and you post those claims against the charges that were in there, it has to go look up who the next payer is, and then you have to trigger bills for that next payer. It is so hand in glove. All the pieces, all the components are so tightly integrated in order to do the complexities of medical billing. There was no choice. You really have to do that pretty much completely. There's no particularly smooth transition that can be done. And as a result, while the clinical software has been transitioning over the past few years, the changes such as submission runner and so on that have been done on the financial side, on the billing side, have been pretty modest. And as a result, we have to do a pretty complete top to bottom changeover with regard to the billing functionality. But if we do it well enough, you will be excited at the prospect of learning something new, but learning something that's a ton better. And that's on us to make sure it's that much cooler and that much better and that much nicer. That was a fascinating look into me and my thinking and Echo's thinking process on this whole thing, but who cares? Let's take a look at the software, and Alan is going to take us there. When I log in as a primarily clinical user into EchoVantage, which is the name we have bequeathed upon this incredibly new, cool thing. And by the way, I've done this for a whole bunch of years. I stand up here and I tell you about what's going on at Echo, and I don't know, I talk. And I prepare, and I try to be good, and I tell you about what shampoo I use and things like that. But this is different. This is important. This is a big deal for me. Today is a big deal for me. And I'm really interested in the kind of feedback that I get from you as a result of all the efforts that a bunch of people have contributed to making this all happen. Alan, I'm going to ask you to go to Dorothy Gale, and we're just going to go right to visiting Dorothy Gale. I'm going to go back to this screen in a few minutes. This is the visual health record. This is the VHR that your clinical staff, that 20,000 people today are going to use, and it looks the same. It should. It's the intent is for it to look the same. Much of the code is the same. The category depiction manager things that control the there are too many buttons. There are 3 buttons on here. I know it. I know. You give me 3 buttons, and I'm going to hit the other 2 before I hit the one that's the right one. There we go. So the things that you're used to seeing on here are all the same. Obviously, the top of the screen's a little bit different, but basically I'm looking at something that I'm comfortable with, that if I'm one of those 20,000 clinicians, I don't need a ton of retraining in order to navigate my way around here. Now, things do look different. I'm not going to click on something and jump back to a Delphi screen that looks old. I'm going to click on a client profile for Dorothy Gale, and Alan's going to pick up from the tone of my voice that I actually wanted him to do that. That the look and feel is different, and the colors are soothing and calming, and it has a consistency that, of course, you haven't seen in the past. Is this disruptive to your clinical staff? There's some change. Where you find a particular field that needs to be entered might be in a different place. If I click on episodes, for example, I'm going to find stuff there that's formatted a little bit differently. I have a history of the episodes shown over here. I'm clicking on this because this is being streamed and recorded, and the recording actually includes this button and this light, and so it's different from a laser pointer, but it's crummy. I don't like it at all. So The history of staff who've been assigned to this particular episode for this particular client, you've got that history. You've got it presenting problems in the bottom right-hand side. So the format is different. There are some enhancements based on requests you've made, that ability to see the history of all the staff people right there. If I look at enrollments, it's going to look a little bit different as well. But I capture essentially the same information that I have in the past in a different format and with a better display of the history associated with it. Diagnosis does look different. I click there, I get a little card, that's the term we use for the little doodads up there. I have two different primary diagnoses depending upon which of my staff members might be seeing that individual, although this particular one is inactive because there's an end date in there. If I click on oppositional defiant disorder, I'm going to get the look and feel associated with the actual ICD code and then the DSM description. And then I can go down the road and put in the DSM-5 modifiers, specifiers and criteria. It has the look that matches and the functionality that matches the DSM-5 approach to diagnostic management. There are SNOMED codes available. There are different quirks associated with it. I don't use primary, secondary, and so on to control whether something's billable or not. I have the power to do that separately. We can talk about all those things, and actually I'll tell you why we would. But I'm going to quit out of here for a second. So I do have the capacity to wander through these things that I'm used to going through, and then going back to the timeline associated with Dorothy Gale brings me back to what I'm used to. Is it different? Yeah. Is it disruptional? Does it require a lot of retraining for your clinical staff? No, no, no. The idea is for it to be transitional, for it to be smooth, and for it to be fast, easy to learn, but also fast and easy to operate, which is something we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. The timeline, what would you expect if I click on a service record? You're going to see something that does look different from the activity entry, service entry that you're used to. We'll come back here and talk about this in a little more detail when I talk about billing. What you're looking at there are, program location, activity, attendance, recipient. Those happen to be the components that this organization is using, and the language associated with that and so on. All that stuff's user definable as it's always been. I have the staff person and supervisor and so on. I'm going to ask you to click on the note, Alan. Up will pop a note. Now the note is what we call structured progress notes in Clinician's Desktop. In this case, it works much the same way, although I'll show you how much easier it is to attach a specific note to a particular type of service in a minute. But of course, it's Form Designer based, not Window Designer, Windesi based. And so again, you have the consistency of look and feel, and you have the advantages associated with the speed of operation of having a single platform, not both a Delphi platform and a Java web platform, but all Java-based, web-based software, is what you're looking at. If I close the structured progress note, and I close the service. Again, nothing significant to learn. Does it look different? It does. Might you recreate your structured progress note using Form Designer and have it look somewhat different and have to teach your... So, no, you're shaking your head. No, I'm sorry. I don't know who you are. I don't remember your name. But you're shaking your head. No, I'm not going to change the structured progress note. But we'll talk a little bit more. At 3 o'clock today, Kathy Bunker and other members of the team here will lead a discussion in this room, because we want everyone to attend that will dive into more detail in aspects of the software that I'm showing you, and will begin to capture from you more detail with regard to your feedback. I want to give you an overview that is primarily philosophical. What we're trying to achieve, why we did some of the things we did, perhaps why we didn't do some of the things that we did. That's what I'm trying to capture here. But if you actually want to know anything, you want to come back here at 3 o'clock today. You just get to hear me babble on. If I go down to the Phq Assessment, click on the old flag there, I don't think this would be at all different from what the clinical staff would be observing today. They might have an assessment instrument, it might have been billed in Form Designer, and it would sit behind the icon that is displayed on the VHR. So if I leave there, again, what was our intent? Our intent was to provide a smooth transition for your clinical staff that would not involve a lot of disruption, not involve a lot of retraining, not a lot of pain and suffering associated with it. Is there some stuff? Yeah, and we can talk about that. But for the most part, it's just updating everything, making things look more consistent, making them look and work more reliably, faster, etc. If I leave here, though, and I go back to the front page, the vantage point associated with clinical entry, you see 3 work areas. In the upper right-hand corner, you see the client list, which is where Alan typed in GAL. Why don't you type GAL, just to show them how you can do that again. And it does that search, and it very quickly finds that particular client. It would display your clients. That would be your client list. That's a starting point for you to access a particular individual. You have your schedule down the left-hand side. If I click on week, I get a weekly view of the schedule. If I click on month, I get what I hope I expect. And if I go to day, that's what I've got. That isn't finished. And there's stuff that I'll comment on throughout here that isn't finished. But that isn't finished because it's new. It's new from the ground up. There's not one line of code from old scheduling in there. We decided it was really important to create the next generation scheduling piece, and it needs to be able to handle scheduling of rooms, and it needs to do a better job of handling scheduling of groups. And there have been a whole array of requests from people, and patching together the old version and jamming it in here was not the smart thing to do. So I'm giving you a heads up that this is in process. It isn't finished, and you can't wander around and do a lot of stuff here, but it is open for discussion. Things that you want to be sure are in scheduling, those would be things you might bring up with the folks today at 3 o'clock, for example. And they'll have some questions for you that we couldn't decide among ourselves that you folks will contribute to. So that's the scheduling. The piece over here that's completely blank. So Alan, I'm pointing over here, right? And it's going over there. Does this make any sense at all? Okay. So and it's clearly your fault. There's no question. It couldn't possibly be my lack of eye-hand coordination or anything. So messages and alerts is truly mysterious. You don't see anything at all there. That's because there isn't anything to show you there. From the ground up, you have Echo Mail, you have a signature system, you don't have any real internal instant messaging capacity associated with Echo's existing clinician's desktop. But you have a whole bunch of stuff, and it's somewhat all over the place. In addition, you have an alert system which people use, and it works pretty well, but it's focused on a set of alerts that we grant to you. We tell you these are alerts that you're able to set up, and you can't make up your own alerts and so on. So that's all also going out the window. And we're replacing that with a from the ground up rebuilt integrated messaging and alert system. They need to tell you something. Whether it's the clinician down the hall wants you to know about this, or schedule lunch with you, or whether it's we want to tell your supervisor that this progress note is ready for signature, or whether you want to be alerted about all of the services you've entered that don't have progress notes attached to them. Whatever the alerts are, whatever the messages you want to send internally, and whatever links you want to have to particular records in the database that go along with that, that will all be handled through this messaging alerts piece. It's in progress, but I don't have anything to show you with regard to that today. We'll talk about timeframes and so on for completion of various pieces of the thing. Alan, can you pop up a look at Revenue Manager? Okay, so there's a screen that looks familiar to those of you who have to send medical bills out. Now, medical billing is hard and crazy and insane and among the most difficult and complex processes that any business anywhere in America or the world has to face, because it's Looney Tunes. It makes no sense. Its primary purpose is to enable insurance companies to keep money for as long as possible. You can write that down. That's a quote. Unless there's somebody from insurance companies listening, no. Is this streaming to insurance companies all over America? I'm staying perfectly still here. Yeah, I'm afraid to move. We're not evil. We didn't devise this screen because we hate you. 15 years ago, it looked pretty reasonable. And of course, it's gotten crazier in 15 years of changes by insurance companies, additional requirements, all the different state variations associated. I mean, we keep having to tack all this junk on here, and over 15 years, the thing became this. And you look at that and you say, what would I do next? And so when you lose your lead billing person, or if you're a smaller agency, you have one billing person. You lose that person, you hire your next billing person, and you say, okay, this is how you bill. They're off to a slow start, and I think we all have to recognize that. So we devoted time and effort, and I know we've shown you examples of this, but what you're going to look at now is the live EchoVantage. Alan, if you're a clinician. So the vantage point for fiscal is this screen, and it does have one row down below. Just so you know, it doesn't go on for pages and pages. Depending upon the screen that you're using, all that would appear on your screen. That is the screen. What is billing? What is medical billing? The clinician sees somebody and enters a service entry, an activity entry, and records what he or she did with that particular client. That's what we refer to as an unprocessed service. What do I have to do? And in this particular case, I have 22 of those sitting in there, and as a result of previous processing, I have 3 errors in there that are uncorrected. What do I have to do with that raw service entry that a clinician has entered? I have to go out and gather a whole bunch of information. I have to look up who the client's insurer is. I have to look up that service. I have to look up the rates associated with that service. I have to determine what the rates are for that particular payer. I have to determine whether that diagnosis is billable for that particular service or that particular clinician. I got a whole bunch of things I need to do, and that's what we mean by the processing that we have to perform on that raw service that's been entered into the system. Once I've done that, though, once I've push the button, process those services, I now have a hunk of data sitting there that's ready to be billed. I have a bunch of records that are ready to be billed, and in this particular case, I have a series of unbilled charges totaling $2,100. I have a history of the processing that's occurred. I have the fact that I've set a goal of not going over $2,000 in unbilled charges associated with this, and I turn red because I've got a bunch of money sitting there. Now, maybe I'm only allowed to bill that payer or payers once a month or whatever it might be, but I know that I've got money sitting there that I would like to be going after and pursuing. I have my accounts receivable. I have the unpaid balances. And once I've sent those bills out, once I perform that processing that creates the 837 or the CMS 1500, I beam that stuff out there, I mail that stuff out there, and money comes back in, and I have unprocessed remittances. Now, those might be an 835 that I pulled in automatically. They might be self-pay payments that I've received, but I enter those payments, and then I have to process them, meaning apply those payments against a particular charge. And then if they're isn't a complete payment at that point, I need to look up to see if there's another payer involved, self-pay or another insurer, and I have to do the waterfall to that next payer, and then I have to have whatever is now remaining to be billed to that next payer move up to unbilled charges, and I begin that recurrent cycle associated with that. All that stuff that I'm doing up here creates general ledger transactions that I have to either beam over on an automated basis to my general ledger, or I produce a report and I type in general journal entries, however I choose to do it. And down on the bottom where it belongs, I have some stuff that I don't know what to do with, which are, Alan can't seem to find his way there. The final row down there, I have unapplied payments, which I have to go in and work on once in a while, particularly with regard, and hopefully going forward almost exclusively with regard to self-pay payments, particularly where I received a payment from the client as he or she was leaving the office, and I don't yet have a service to apply it against that's been entered by the clinician. And so that should be the bulk of what we call unapplied payments. But I'll stay up on the top there. That's it. Flip back to the RevMan one, if you would, please. So there's that, and it's all there somewhere in a form, but if I go back to EchoVantage, this is the flow, this is the process. So I'm going to do a little orientation for you. If I click on unprocessed services, I'm going to get a list of all of them that are sitting in there, and I have the capacity to filter on those things and do dates and stuff. If I click, and this is a standard, if I click on the top box, then all the records will be selected for processing. If I unclick on the top box and I click on individual boxes down below, I can click on, an occasional one or two, and if I hit the minus sign in the top box, they're unclicked and so on. In any case, this is where I would create a job associated with the processing of services. And I'm not going to go there quite yet, but you'll see two other tabs up here, a history tab and an errors tab, and I can click on those and I could go there, but instead I'm going to quit out of here for just a second. And basically, if I click on unprocessed services, I go to where I just was. If I click on last processed, I go to the same place, but instead, I'm positioned on the history tab, on the middle tab. Okay, so I jump directly there. I can go back and forth. There's nothing that says you can't. But if I want to look at the history, last process, I get that information here. And you'll see some stuff on here, stuff that's not yet finalized, and I also have examples of some here that have errors. Notice, for example, that the processing for John Doe, or whatever that is, has a total of 2 errors associated with it. And if I go back, Alan, to the front screen, to the vantage point, and I click on errors, I go to the same place again, actually, just to show you. If I go back to create, and I click there, Alan, you'll see that's the one I was just on. If I go to history, you'll see the screen I was just on. Now I'm on errors. So the front screen, depending on where you click, it just takes you to this particular spot. And now if I go here, oh, Alan, you anticipated me. That's the first time this entire... 20 years. That's the first time you've ever anticipated what I wanted you to do. It's incredible. This is a special moment between Alan and me that we're all sharing with you. So here are those 2 errors associated with. I'm pointing over here. Associated with those 2 jobs. If I click on the top one, I don't think it matters. Down below, I get the detail, and I might have 1 or 3 or 37 or 237 errors there. This one says error. No payers exist for this client in service definition. No payers exist. And so you'll notice it's blue, and therefore it's a link. So if I click on that link, it comes up in that particular client, Dawn Jones, and I am ready to add a payer for that particular client. I'm ready to add the payer. So that when I get an error, this is not for people who don't know what they're doing, but it's helpful for people who don't know what they're doing because it will take you to the place where you should go to fix the error and save you all the time of searching for Dawn Jones and finding where you add a payer for Dawn Jones and so on. Unfortunately, last night I fixed the one where there was no gender entered for somebody, and that was way fun too. But it doesn't work in every possible situation. Let's do one more, just to show you an example. If you could go back and go to the other job, I think it was the first one that had errors on it. And yeah, there are 3 errors in that particular one. And services on hold for authorizations. So if I have a nice, clear answer like that, I go right to the authorization screen, and I have the capacity to add authorizations associated with those screens. I can't tell you that every error will have an automated link associated with it yet. There are some that are harder to do, but mostly it's just we haven't gotten to them. And so as you well, we'll figure it out. But if you have one that, oh my goodness, I make this error or my staff makes this error all the time and you haven't created a link for it, just tell us and we'll connect up that one. We're doing them one at a time as we get to them. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? The basic rule of thumb is if you got an error, we want to give you the capacity to click on the error and jump right to the place where you can correct that error. If I go back then to the main screen, to the Vantage Point screen, the others look the same. If I go to unbilled charges, you'll see that same stuff on the top, the create, history, and errors. And it works precisely the same fashion. Consistency, simplicity, and speed. Okay, so I haven't talked about speed. One of the reasons for doing a foundational change to the billing thing is to speed it up and to make the reliability and the consistency of the record locking as close to flawless as we can possibly make it, meaning that you don't have to get out of doing that in order for me to do that, number one. And number two, instead of it taking this long, it ought to take a lot less long to do the next step. Now, we haven't done a huge array of speed testing. And speed testing isn't wildly meaningful because it depends so much on your data and the specifics, how much bundling you do, and how complex your rate rules are, and so on. There are a variety of things that influence the speed with which your stuff will perform. But as an example, one of the components we tested recently in processing took about 40 minutes to perform in in Revenue Manager. 40 minutes to perform that task in Revenue Manager. We came back with running it in EchoVantage. Took 4 minutes. Took 4 minutes. Pretty common result in terms of the impact. Diane, where are you? Are you here today? Yes, Diane, in the corner. Diane sets high expectations. It's kind of annoying in some ways, but in this particular case, it's great. She's wonderful. And she said, that's no good. It shouldn't take 4 minutes. And so a little bit later, it took 90 seconds. And so that thing that took 40 minutes to do in Revenue Manager now takes 90 seconds in order to do here. And folks can talk more about that. Again, exactly what your experience will be might well be different, but it won't be twice as fast or 3 times as fast. It'll be a whole lot faster than that in almost all of the big processing situations, just to give you a perspective. One of the things that you have to do in order to make that fast is to normalize the database. That means we couldn't leave all the data structures exactly the way they were. tables that had gotten really wide and had lots of fields in them instead become smaller tables, skinnier tables that are linked to another table and another table. That's much faster in SQL to perform those tasks. That means some of the custom reports that you've written for yourselves won't work out of the box. You'll have to look at the database and look at how those changes might affect you. That's what we mean by the agency self-assessment and the impact on you folks. That's one of the most painful things we had to do. We didn't try to overdo it. We didn't try to do it purely make changes for the sake of making changes, but we had to make changes in order to speed things up. If I go over here and just to orient you to the screen and I select a Medicare, I think it was, payer, filters are available here. I apply those filters, and of the $2,000 in unbilled charges, $1,500 is to Medicare. All of the amount owed in the accounts receivable is to Medicare, and 114 of the unprocessed remittances are in Medicare. That means that from this front screen, you will have not only the capacity to trigger all of the processing tasks and to select what you want to process and so on, but you'll have information, you'll have data. And you don't have to go back to the revenue manager screen, but you had no data on the revenue manager screen. This tells you what you ought to be doing next. No, it doesn't. It suggests to you what you might do next. We're not that bossy, yeah, so we're much nicer than that. So, but it tells you where you need to go in order to get the cash. And that's your job. Your job running this stuff is to generate the revenue that enables the agency to actually achieve its mission of providing services to people with behavioral health issues. And that's the tool we're trying to give you here, is something that's powerful, that's fast, that's easy to use, that when you leave and the next billing person comes on board, that the 4 hours of training that you're going to have to give to that person, this is something you might actually be able to make a dent in. And we'll have training materials, and we'll have videos, and we'll have stuff like that. But the idea is to make this a much more practical thing for people to do. Medical billing is still hard. And so I'm going to show you just a few more things. I have no idea what time it is. It's 9:30. Okay. So if I go to configuration for a second, and I go to components. So remember you saw the service entry on the clinical screen that I showed you. They only had these 5 components to each service entry. And you can have 5 or 4. If I click on location, this is where I enter my locations. If I click on the little pencil thing, that's where I can change the location to the word office if I wanted to change it there, and it'll change it everywhere in the system. Oh my God, don't change anything, Alan. Thank you. There you go. Okay. So Kathy would be so angry at us if we were. She has her own database. Oh, go crazy, Alan. Do whatever you want. Okay. So close out of here. And then hitting the big plus sign here would be where you would add a whole nother component. So if you wanted to have the ability for clinicians to enter mileage whenever they enter a service. They don't have to use it, but they can enter mileage. You could put that here. If you have a severity index, a simple number, and you don't want to put it into the progress note, but you want it right here, or a category, whatever, you could stick that in. So whatever you want for those categories. I believe that in addition to the 5 core ones that we typically use, I think you have 10 more that are available to you. So you have a whole bunch of things you can create in addition to your structured progress note. So if I leave here, and again, I wanted to give you a sense of what the thing feels like and the consistency of the look and feel. If I go, Alan, under configuration to filters, let's go to filters real quick. So filters, if I want to look at alcohol and drug, I have no idea what's here. And I click on program. So here I could mark 4 of those and have them all mapped to that particular filter. If I hit the plus sign and I created, I wanted to use another component and I wanted to use recipient, I could combine it and say, gee, I want to create a filter that finds for me all the clients, all the services that were delivered on Oak Street, at the Oak Street office to groups, and be able to record that or make that a particular filter that I would have. And there are a whole bunch of places in the system where these filters that you create and that you manage can be applied. We're jumping out, yeah, configuration, and I go down, staff's boring, service definitions. So if I go to service definitions and I click on the individual therapy, can I go down further? I could search, but I don't have to. I found individual therapy. So I have a service code. If I go to components, I would have the components I wanted for individual therapy. I might have 3 or 5. I might combine that by hitting the plus sign with only in the office do I want this service to be considered a 908 whatever, or school-based individual therapy might have a different rate. So I create the rule by which I define this service as being this particular service, what mix of components. Rates. So if I go to rates and I go down a little ways here, so this is the default rate for this individual psychotherapy service. Notice you have the capacity, I'm laughing at myself, at the capacity to enter the minute ranges here and have it modify some people get it, that modify so I don't have to enter a service code with a different rate, a whole different category, just because of the number of minutes of the duration. I can put it all here, create a table, and it will compute the number of units associated with that. So it greatly simplifies the development. What doesn't it do? It doesn't let us push a button and easily, and perhaps at all, convert your existing services table into this. I can't do that because we've given you some capacity to do stuff better and smarter. You're going to have to re-enter your service definitions. It'll be way faster than the original time, but it'll take longer than just leaving Revenue Manager alone. I mean, it's a task that will be associated with your transition to this new product. This will speed stuff up too, by the way. That's one of the kinds of things that affects the speed of performance. If I click on progress notes, and I don't have a lot of stuff in here, but if I indicate, remember I'm in service entry. So if this service is individual psychotherapy and I click note required, then the progress note forms is active. It's not anything in here. Default service note is the only thing that's in here. I apologize for that. But basically, if I have 8 structured progress notes, one for a nursing note and one for for an individual psychotherapy by a social worker, if I have a medication note, if I have a case management note, and those are all formatted differently, this allows me to attach to that particular type of service a particular note. So when I'm the clinician and I go in and I am a nurse and I put in my staff code as nurse and I'm providing a nursing visit, when I click on note, I don't have to pick from a list of notes. The note that I have assigned to nursing notes is the one that will pop up. So for the clinician, no decision to be made. What you do determines the format of the note, which I think makes sense. Not in all cases. And so you have the capacity to pick from notes as well. There are going to be exceptions to that rule. But this gives you a nice, easy way to attach a particularly formatted note. I'm going into more detail than I'm going to be able to. Let's go a little quicker. Configuration. If I go down further, oh, remember, I just typed in the rates associated with individual psychotherapy. Now I'm going to go to payers, and I'm going to go to, okay, you go there. We'll see what happens. And I go to, so this is the payers, not the client payer, but I'm creating my payer database. If I go to rates here, okay, now follow me here. See, bundled partial day says default rate. So this is Medicaid managed care, and they use the default rate that I entered attached to the service. So will Blue Cross and Anthem and Cigna and other people will use that unless I say I don't want that. Unless I say this payer gets a different rate. And then I have the payer rate. See, it says payer rate instead of default rate. So if I click on alcohol and drug, now I have the capacity to enter down below all the information necessary to compute rates associated with that particular payer for that service. If I go to family counseling and I go to the default rate, I don't have all that stuff. See, down at the bottom there, it's the default rate. That's back in the services table, okay, where I've created the rule for that. And so they all will be utilized. The default rates attached to the service will be utilized unless I pick a variation for this particular payer. If you go up top on that one, Alan, this is the magic button, Override Service Definition Default. If I click on that button, then I'll be able to enter a rate that's different for this payer versus the default rate that I'm going to use with my other payers. If I go one more time to configuration, I'm nearing the end, I promise, and I go down to user groups. I don't know, I think that's where I want to go. If I go to user groups, and I go to administrators, and I go to menu options. So this gives you a little bit of sense of some of the security associated with the system. This is where you turn on and turn off the rights for people. You get assigned to a user group. That was that administration group that I selected, or I asked Alan to select. And then this is where I indicate what menu options I have rights to, what things I have access to, and so on. And again, look and feel is consistent, simplicity is the goal, and you get some idea of what we're trying to achieve. If I jump, Alan, did we attach the help to this? Click on it, let's see what happens. Let's try and break it. We're going out to the web, and we're looking at the outline of the help we have here. If I went to, I don't know what's in here, screen navigation glossary, I've got some screens and I don't have a lot of glossary. And I have some stuff. I have some stuff. Some of it's pretty good, and some of it's very complete. I also have some videos, which I won't try to run from in here. You see video tutorials. They're also up on top, and other components. So the idea is to provide you with a level of responsive help that is up to date, that's new, that's comprehensive, and that's much more easily used, much more easily searched, and much more video-oriented. We want to make sure that the way you learn is supported, and it's particularly for newer people, and particularly for clinical staff, we want to make the capacity to watch a movie about how to navigate around the timeline to be as easy as possible. And if I click on reports, and I go wherever you want to take me, fiscal, and I go to an aging report maybe. I don't want a crummy old audit report. And I go to a summary aging, and I log in there. We've put this in your way. This won't be there when you're done doing this. We won't save anything. And if you just say everybody, include all payers, and include all programs, and include all whatever. Yeah, I think you're good. There aren't a lot of records in here, and so this is popping up very quickly. It will pop up quickly. All these reports are built using SSRS, the Microsoft SQL Server reporting system. They are accessible to you, so you can take one and edit it and modify it. Rather than have to build something from scratch. So where we've already built the queries that provide the breakdown by number of days, you can take advantage of that query. You can make a copy of that report, edit it, modify it, and then reattach it to the menu, or attach it to the menu. You can attach your own from scratch built reports. Generally, they'll work faster than the Crystal reports that you've had up till now. They're easier for you to create and attach because the creation of the filtering is just an easier thing to do. It's just simpler for you to build your own reports and attach them directly into the menu system. Is this a huge change? Probably not, but it is a change. And we hope you'll be using fewer and fewer of these big, bulky reports. And so I am going to ask you to do one more thing, Alan. You're going to go back to EchoVantage. You're going to go to claims management. And Kathy, where are you? Okay, so she's tearing up. This is, if you would go to a client, Alan, Buzzle, Lucas Buzzle has something in there. If you could do that and hit search. So these are the transactions, the services associated with Lucas Buzzle. And if I click on one of those rows, Alan, the top row would be fine, I think. I'm going to get the complete detail associated with Lucas Buzzle's service and that particular service. I'm going to get the history of the waterfall. I'm going to get copays. I'm going to get rejections. I'm going to get the waterfall billing. I'm going to get all of that information. And if I go back to the front screen, I'm going to get I'm going to have that capacity to do it, not just for an individual client or an individual service, but I could pick a payer and a group of services on a particular day or a particular range of dates. I'm going to look at the detail associated with that. I have an awful lot of capacity to quickly query the database in a way that hopefully will keep me from having to wander through a lot of the large sort of big dump reports that you utilize on a regular basis. Try to minimize that, try to make much more of this accessible on the screen through quick queries into the database. I could keep going. No, I'm going to stop. This is different. The revenue manager experience is being replaced by something that isn't just new. But it's better, and it's thought through with 35 years worth of experience in the medical billing world, and the simplicity associated with this is amazing. I mean, it's as simple as you can make something that's really, really hard. It's the best I think we could do, and certainly if you have suggestions about ways to improve it, if you go to the fiscal overview, ways to improve this graphic to provide more information or better information or whatever. But simplicity, simplicity, simplicity is a big goal for us on this side. But it's a change, and it's not a trivial change, but it's one that should be so attractive to you that we hope will be fighting you off by the end of this peer-to-peer session as far as your insistence on being first in line.